Every year, when Halloween comes, the small village of Maplewood is bustling with pumpkin lanterns, houses decorated with fake cobwebs and creepy skeletons. Children dress up as ghosts, knocking on doors, shouting trick or treat to ask for candy. However, not everyone knows the legend of Jack-o'-lantern, a cursed spirit who only appears on Halloween night to take revenge on those who dare to tease his fate. Every year, when Halloween comes, the small village of Maplewood is bustling with pumpkin lanterns, houses decorated with fake cobwebs and creepy skeletons. Children dress up as ghosts, knocking on doors, shouting trick or treat to ask for candy. However, not everyone knows the legend of Jack-o'-lantern, a cursed spirit who only appears on Halloween night to take revenge on those who dare to tease his fate. One Halloween night, in the festive spirit, the Lewis family decided to throw a big party at their house. Their house was located on an isolated hill overlooking the entire village. The Lewis family did not believe in old legends. They laughed off the warnings from their neighbors not to make jack-o'-lanterns that were too similar to the legend of Jack. Anna Lewis, a 16-year-old girl, is famous in her school for her mischievous and somewhat arrogant personality. When she heard about the legend of Jack-o'-lantern, she was not afraid and decided to carve a jack-o'-lantern herself to tease her friends. Anna created a jack-o'-lantern with a scary face, slanted eyes, and a sly smile, just like the legend described. "Hey, if Jack is real, come and find me." Anna laughed loudly as she lit the candle inside the pumpkin and placed it on the windowsill. The Lewis family Halloween party was in full swing. Laughter and music filled the air. While everyone was having a good time, no one noticed that the candle in Anna's jack-o'-lantern began to burn brighter, the fire inside glowing redder than usual. A gentle breeze began to blow around the house, colder even though the weather had not changed. Anna was standing talking with her friends when suddenly she heard a knock on the door. She signaled for everyone to be quiet so they could hear better. The knock came again, louder and more urgent. "Who's knocking at this hour?" Anna frowned in confusion. No one at the party thought to check, assuming it was just a bunch of naughty kids. But when Anna opened the door, there was no one there. Only the light from the jack-o'-lantern illuminated the empty street. A cold wind suddenly rushed in from outside, making Anna shiver. She closed the door, feeling uncomfortable and a little confused. At that moment, the music in the house suddenly stopped. The lights in the living room flickered, then went out. Everyone looked at each other, confused, not understanding what was happening. Maybe the power went out, Anna guessed, but no one could explain why the lights in the whole village were still on, while only their house was dark. Amidst the sudden silence, a strange noise came from the window. A shadow appeared in the dim light of the jack-o'-lantern. The shadow seemed to move, growing larger, slowly approaching the house. "There's someone out there," someone shouted, pointing toward the window. Anna ran out to check, but saw no one. She turned back to her friends, but she began to feel scared. Suddenly, the candle in the jack-o'-lantern went out. At the same time, the front door flew open with a loud screech, causing everyone at the party to scream in horror. Anna tried to close the door, but it was as if it was blocked by an invisible force. The shadow in front of the door was now clearer, a blurry figure with a glowing jack-o'-lantern above its head. It was Jack, the cursed spirit returning to find the one who had offended him. "No way," Anna screamed, trying to run away. She rushed into the house, but Jack's footsteps kept getting closer. Every door in the house slammed shut. Anna's friends screamed in panic, unable to find a way out. Jack stopped in the middle of the living room, his fiery eyes fixed on Anna. "You called me, and I came." His voice seemed to echo from the underworld, deep and cold. "You will never escape my curse." Anna tried to run, but the fire from Jack's jack-o'-lantern spread throughout the room, engulfing everything. Jack's eerie laughter echoed in the smoky, burning air. The next morning, Maplewood Village awoke to a gloomy atmosphere. No one had seen or heard about the party at the Lewis house. When the villagers arrived at the house on the hill, they found only a pile of ashes and the broken pieces of an extinguished jack-o'-lantern. The curse of jack-o'-lantern was once again spread, reminding everyone that on Halloween night, no one should challenge Jack's ghost. Maplewood Village became more cautious from then on. Jack-o'-lanterns were still lit on Halloween night, but no one dared to make Jack's face anymore. The story takes place in the village of Sleepy Hollow, a small, rural area nestled along the Hudson River in New York. This place is known for its peacefulness and mysterious beauty, with dense forests, calm rivers, and ancient houses. But what is more special are the legends and ghost stories that the residents here tell each other. And the most famous legend is that of the Headless Horseman. According to folklore, the Headless Horseman is the ghost of a German mercenary killed during the American Revolution. He lost his head in battle, and since then his spirit has roamed Sleepy Hollow, searching for his missing head. On dark nights, the horseman has been seen galloping through the woods at breakneck speed, holding a glowing pumpkin in place of his head. Anyone who encounters him has met a terrible fate. The narrator is Ichabod Crane, a schoolteacher from Connecticut, who has just arrived in Sleepy Hollow to teach. Ichabod is a tall, lanky man with rugged shoulders and a long neck. Despite his odd appearance, however, Ichabod is a gifted talker, especially when it comes to ghost stories. He enjoys hearing and telling stories about the supernatural, and the legend of the Headless Horseman intrigues him greatly. Ichabod quickly settled into life in Sleepy Hollow. In addition to his teaching job, he led the church choir and frequently helped out in the village. He lived in the homes of the locals and received hearty meals from the families, making him a very welcome presence in the village. Among those Ichabod takes an interest in is Katrina Van Tassel, the only daughter of a wealthy family in the area. Katrina is a beautiful young woman and the heiress to the largest farm in Sleepy Hollow. Her family's wealth attracts the attention of many young men in the area, including Ichabod. However, Ichabod is not the only one pursuing Katrina. His formidable opponent is Brom Bones, a strong and reckless young man known for his bravery and daring. Brom and Ichabod are two completely opposite personalities. While Ichabod is fragile, intelligent, and cautious, Brom is always ready to use strength and recklessness to solve problems. The competition between Ichabod and Brom for Katrina's heart becomes increasingly tense, especially as Ichabod becomes overconfident in his charms. One particular night, the Van Tassel family throws a big party at their farm. Ichabod dresses up in his best clothes, hoping to impress Katrina and win her affection. The party is a riot of music, and horror stories are told all night long. As the night wore on, Ichabod, as usual, was drawn into the ghost stories of the residents of Sleepy Hollow. They told of ghosts, mysterious phenomena in the village, and of course, the story of the Headless Horseman. Ichabod listened with a strange interest, but had no idea that night, he would have a direct encounter with the very demon he had only heard about. After the feast, Ichabod decided to ride home. That night, the moon was dim, the forest was strangely quiet, and everything seemed to be waiting for something terrible to happen. On the way home, as he passed through a dense forest, Ichabod began to feel uneasy. The air was stuffy, and in the darkness, he heard the pounding of horses' hooves behind him. When Ichabod turned around, he saw a huge black figure riding after him. It was a tall horseman, but the most terrifying thing was that the horseman had no head. Instead, he held a glowing pumpkin in his hand. The Headless Horseman. Ichabod urged his horse into a gallop, his hooves pounding behind him. He raced through the narrow streets, trying to escape the dark figure that was chasing him. His mind was filled with fear and the haunting tales he had heard. Finally, when they reached the bridge near the old church, which was believed to be impassable by the horsemen, Ichabod hoped this would be a safe stop. But as he turned around, the Headless Horseman threw the pumpkin straight at Ichabod. The pumpkin hit him hard on the head, sending him tumbling to the ground. All was dark. The next morning, the villagers found Ichabod's hat lying on the ground near the bridge, but there was no trace of him. A smashed pumpkin lay nearby. Ichabod had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Some speculated that he had been taken by the Headless Horseman, while others said he had become so frightened that he had fled Sleepy Hollow. Since then, the legend of Ichabod and the Headless Horseman has continued to haunt becoming part of the mystical history of Sleepy Hollow. Brombones later married Katrina, and whenever he heard about Ichabod's encounter with the Headless Horseman, he would always smirk mysteriously. Everyone knew that, whatever the truth, Sleepy Hollow would always be a village, haunted by horrors, and the ghost of the Headless Horseman would continue to roam the dark nights. The main character of the story is a nameless man who once had a normal, happy life and loved animals. He married a gentlewoman, and the two lived in a small house where they raised many animals. Among them, his favorite animal was Pluto, a large, intelligent, and very loyal black cat. Pluto was always by his side, and he loved it with all his heart. However, this peace did not last forever. As time passed, the man began to change. Affected by excessive drinking, his personality gradually became irritable, violent, and cruel. He often argued with his wife, tortured the animals in the house, and even began to alienate himself. Pluto, once his best friend, became the target of his irrational anger. One night, after getting drunk, the man returned home and saw Pluto. The black cat accidentally scratched his hand when he pulled it hard. Caught up in the anger and cruelty boiling inside him, he pulled out a dagger and viciously stabbed Pluto straight into the eye. Pluto was in pain and ran away, but could not escape his tragic fate. The next day, when his anger subsided, he felt remorse, but the cruelty in him won over his reason. After a while, Pluto disappeared. The man did not bother to look for the cat and was even relieved that he no longer had to face the reproachful eyes of his close friend. However, a terrible event occurred not long after that. His house was completely burned down in a huge fire. He and his wife were lucky to escape, but everything they owned was reduced to ashes. In the rubble, he discovered a wall that was still standing. On its scorched surface was a bizarre image of a cat with a rope hanging around its neck. A feeling of horror and obsession began to invade his mind. Even though he knew it was just a coincidence, he could not escape the haunting image of Pluto. The image of that deadly cat seemed to follow him, a constant reminder of the crime he had committed. A few months later, while out drinking, he spotted another black cat in the bar. This one looked exactly like Pluto, except for a small white spot on its chest. Fascinated by the resemblance, he decided to take the cat home. The cat quickly became attached to him, and its gentleness made him feel somewhat at ease. However, after a while, the presence of the new cat began to make him feel uneasy and fearful. This cat, like Pluto, always followed him, but its eyes, especially the white mark on its chest, made him unable to escape the creepy feeling. He realized that the white mark seemed to have the shape of a noose, reminiscent of how he killed Pluto. The guilt and obsession flared up again, making him increasingly tense and unstable. One night, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, he decided to kill this new cat. However, as he picked up the axe, his wife suddenly walked in and tried to stop him. In a fit of madness, he turned around and smashed the axe into his wife's head, killing her instantly. Terrified by his actions, he immediately tried to cover up his crime. After thinking frantically, he decided to hide his wife's body in the wall of the cellar. He carefully rebuilt the wall, making sure not to leave any traces. No one suspected his wife's disappearance, and he was relieved that he had not been discovered. The cat was also gone, which made him feel even safer. But the following days were not pleasant. He could not escape the fear and the feeling of being haunted. He was constantly worried that his crime would be discovered. The fear grew like a never-ending nightmare. Everything seemed to be fine until the police came to the house to investigate the disappearance of his wife. Confident that no one would discover the body, he was comfortable letting the police search the entire house. However, as they descended into the basement, he felt a growing unease. In a fit of smugness, he tapped the wall where his wife's body was hidden, boasting to the police about how sturdy the wall was. As soon as he hit the wall, a strange, terrifying scream came from inside. The scream seemed to come from the underworld, echoing throughout the basement, causing everyone to freeze. The police immediately broke down the wall, and inside, they found his wife's body along with a black cat sitting on top of her, its eyes glowing in the darkness. The truth is revealed, and the man cannot escape his fate. The black cat has become a witness to the crime and also the ultimate avenger. His fate is sealed by his obsession with Pluto, the cat who has returned from the dead to demand justice. The story ends with the protagonist's madness as a dark lesson in sin and its consequences, with a tragic ending that he himself has created. The story begins on a cold autumn afternoon when Sarah and Mark decided to go to an antique shop on the outskirts of town to look for decorations for their new home. They both love antiques, and finding items of historical value always excites them. After walking around the shop for a while, Sarah's eyes were suddenly drawn to a large antique mirror in the corner of the room, covered in dust, but still exuding a mysterious and magical aura. The mirror was framed in intricately carved oak, with intricate patterns that seemed to have been handcrafted centuries ago. The glass was slightly opaque, reflecting the faint light from the shop window. Despite the antique and somewhat intimidating appearance of the mirror, Sarah was fascinated. She couldn't take her eyes off it, feeling something pulling her. Mark, although not interested in the mirror, agreed to buy it upon seeing his wife's fascination. The two happily took the mirror home and placed it in the hallway near the living room. As soon as the mirror was placed in place, the atmosphere in the house seemed to change, becoming a little colder, even though the temperature outside was still warm. Sarah, still fascinated by the mirror, began to look at herself in it often. At first, everything seemed normal. However, soon, she began to notice strange things. Every time Sarah looked in the mirror, she felt like she was no longer alone. Her reflection seemed unnaturally distorted, and at times, she swore she saw shadowy figures moving behind her. She felt a chill run down her spine whenever she was near the mirror. Sarah began to have trouble sleeping, and she had recurring dreams of an abandoned house where ghostly whispers could be heard coming from the walls. One night, while Mark was working late at the office, Sarah sat alone in the living room. She was drawn to the mirror again, unable to resist moving closer to it. This time, when Sarah looked into the mirror, the face she saw was no longer her own. Instead, another face appeared, that of a strange woman with pale skin, empty eyes, and long flowing hair. The woman in the mirror smiled hauntingly, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah screamed and fell to the floor. When Mark returned home, he found his wife huddled in the corner of the room, shaking. Sarah told him about the strange things that happened, but Mark just dismissed her as tired and stressed. He tried to reassure her that it was all her imagination and that the mirror was just a harmless object. When Mark returned home, he found his wife huddled in the corner of the room shaking. Sarah told him about the strange things that happened, but Mark just dismissed her as tired and stressed. He tried to reassure her that it was all her imagination and that the mirror was just a harmless object. That night, neither of them could sleep. Sarah kept dreaming about the strange woman in the mirror, but this time the dream became more vivid. She found herself standing in an old room, and the mirror was in the middle of the room. The mysterious woman appeared, pointed at her, and said in a cold voice, "You will never escape from this place.
I'll never let you go. Never.
Sarah woke up in a sweat. She realized that she had to find out about the mirror's origins if she was to escape this nightmare. Together with Mark, Sarah went to the antique shop to ask about the mirror's history. The shop owner, an older man, became tense when he heard about the mirror. He explains that the mirror once belonged to a woman named Eliza who lived in the 19th century. Eliza was rumored to be a witch who was brutally murdered by villagers on suspicion of witchcraft. Before her death, Eliza cursed the mirror, turning it into a portal to connect her world with the world of the living. Eliza has sworn that her spirit will live forever in the mirror and drag whoever possesses it into an endless nightmare. Sarah and Mark realize that they have been trapped by Eliza's curse, and if they do not quickly find a way to break the curse, they will be haunted forever by this vengeful spirit. Determined to destroy the mirror, Mark and Sarah took it out of the house and smashed it into pieces. But as soon as the mirror broke, a piercing scream rang out and darkness enveloped the area. From the shards, a dark figure emerged. It was Eliza, her spirit now free. But instead of disappearing, Eliza turned to Sarah with a sinister smile and disappeared into the night. Sarah and Mark moved out of the house, but it seemed they were never truly free from the curse. Sarah still had frequent dreams of Eliza's face, always standing there in the mirrors she passed, as a reminder that Eliza's spirit would never leave them alone. The mirror was destroyed, but the nightmares continued. If you like my story, Please like and subscribe to receive future stories. The small town of Maple Creek is peaceful, with its quaint wooden houses, winding tree-lined streets, and gently flowing streams. Every year on Halloween night, the town becomes even more bustling when children dress up as ghosts, superheroes, witches, or their favorite cartoon characters, running through the streets knocking on doors to ask for candy. Pumpkin lanterns glow on porches. Flickering lights create a spooky but still cheerful atmosphere. But few people know that behind that bustling appearance is a scary legend that not everyone dares to mention. The legend tells of a mysterious child called the Phantom Trick-or-Treater who goes out to beg for candy but never returns. Those who open the door for this child are no longer present the next morning. No one knows what happened to them, but the story of the Phantom Trick-or-Treater is always a haunting story for families in the town. The Thompson family, who had just moved to Maple Creek that summer, had never heard of the legend. They were excited to hear that Halloween was special and fun there. Tom and Lisa Thompson, along with their young daughter Emily, prepared to decorate their house and buy a big bag of candy for the trick-or-treaters. The Thompsons' house was at the end of a quiet road, close to the edge of the woods. The house was old but cozy. Lisa had meticulously decorated every corner with colorful pumpkin lanterns and fake spider webs. Tom was busy arranging candy in a large bowl on the front door, ready for the kids to come knocking. Halloween night came. The atmosphere in the town became more bustling than ever. Emily, dressed as a princess, happily ran around the house, eagerly waiting for the children to knock on the door to ask for candy. Laughter and shouts of "trick or treat" echoed everywhere, bringing an indescribable feeling of joy. Around 9 o'clock, when most of the town's children had gone through the houses, Tom and Lisa planned to turn out the lights and go to bed. But just then, there was a knock on the door. "Must be the last kids tonight," Lisa said to Tom, getting up to answer the door. When the door opened, Lisa couldn't help but be surprised to see a child standing there. The child was wearing a long black cloak that covered his entire body, and on his face was a blank white mask with no expression. "Trick or treat." A voice rang out, but it wasn't the usual cheerful laughter, but a small, strange voice, as if coming from far away. Lisa smiled, took a handful of candy from the large bowl, and dropped it into the child's bag. "Happy Halloween," she said, but the child just stood there, not moving. After a few seconds of hesitation, he turned and walked away without another word. Tom, sitting far away, sensed something was wrong. "What's wrong?" he asked. Lisa closed the door, slightly confused. "Nothing, just that kid is a little strange." Not long after, an eerie feeling began to pervade the house. The lights in the living room flickered, then went out. A cold wind blew through even though all the windows were closed. Tom went to check the circuit breaker, but everything seemed to be working fine. "What's going on?" Lisa asked worriedly. Emily, sitting on the sofa, suddenly fell silent, her eyes fixed on the window, staring out into the darkness. "Mom, there's someone out there watching us," she said in a trembling voice. Tom and Lisa followed Emily's gaze, but saw nothing but the quiet night. Anxiety rose in both of their hearts. "It's probably just the shadow of a tree, nothing more." Tom tried to reassure them, but just then, the knocking sounded again. Lisa's heart pounded. She didn't want to open the door, but she felt an inexplicable urge. When she slowly opened the door, there was no one standing on the porch, but a small bag was lying neatly on the doorstep. She bent down, picked up the bag, and opened it. There was no candy inside, but an old piece of paper. Written on the paper in black ink was, "It's time." Panic filled the house. Tom, Lisa, and Emily began to hear mysterious whispers coming from all directions. The knocking continued incessantly, but every time they opened the door, they found no one but darkness. Finally, the knocking sound disappeared, replaced by a savage laughter that echoed throughout the house. They didn't know what to do, so they just crouched in the living room, holding hands. In the darkness, the lights in the house suddenly went out. Tom looked around, but the darkness had swallowed everything. There was only the sound of creepy laughter echoing in the distance. The next morning, when the neighbors came to the Thompson house, they found no one answering their knocks. The door was ajar, and the house was empty, with no trace of the Thompson family. Only the jack-o'-lantern still smoldered, a warning to all that the phantom trick-or-treater had returned. The town of Maple Creek was silent, and the story of the mysterious child continued to haunt every Halloween night. On Halloween night, a chilly atmosphere pervades the town of Pine Hollow. Children in costumes run through the streets, shouting and laughing, carrying baskets full of candy. Meanwhile, in a hidden corner of town, a group of young people, Sarah, Jake, Emma, and Lucas, gather at an abandoned house at the edge of the woods, a house rumored to have once belonged to an evil witch. Legend has it that the witch Morgana was burned to death centuries ago by her fellow villagers on suspicion of using dark magic to curse the town. Before her death, she vowed to return every year at the witching hour around midnight. It is a time when the boundary between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, when evil spirits roam free and cause harm to those who dare to call their names. Sitting around a small candle, Sarah, Jake, Emma, and Lucas excitedly discussed the plan. "We're going to perform the ritual to summon Morgana," Sarah said excitedly, though there was a hint of fear in her eyes. Jake smiled and agreed. "If we do it right, something might happen. But remember, it's just a legend." Emma, the shyest of the group, was nervous. She had heard many scary stories about this house and about the witch Morgana. However, not wanting to be seen as a coward, she agreed to join. Lucas, who had always loved horror stories, could not hide his excitement. He was the one who brought an old book on magic that he found in the library, a book that promised to contain the ritual to summon Morgana. As the clock struck 11:30 p.m., the group began to prepare for the ritual. Lucas opened the book and found the page about the witch Morgana. On the yellowed pages, strange ancient writings described how to summon the spirit. It required a circle drawn in chalk, a black candle, and all participants had to recite an ancient spell at the stroke of midnight, the witching hour. Jake quickly drew a circle with chalk on the dusty floor, while Sarah placed the black candle in the middle. Lucas began to read the spell from the book aloud, his voice echoing in the silence of the abandoned house. Emma, standing next to him, shivered. She could feel that something was wrong. The air around them was getting colder by the second, and the wind from the broken window made the candle flicker as if it was about to go out. "When the clock strikes 12, we will say this spell again," Lucas said. "That's when Morgana's ghost can hear us." At exactly 12 midnight, the group of friends chanted the final spell in unison. The echoes of the spell seemed to blend with the sound of the wind whistling outside the window, creating an eerie feeling. When the spell ended, the black candle suddenly went out, and the house was plunged into complete darkness. "What the hell is that?" Jake asked, trying to relight the candle, but the flame wouldn't burn. The room felt stuffy. Suddenly, a small noise came from the next room, like soft footsteps on a wooden floor. The group jumped, turning to look at the door. No one dared to move or say anything. "It's probably just the wind," Lucas whispered, trying to calm himself and the others. But then, a sinister laugh rang out from the darkness, causing the group to freeze. It was a high-pitched laugh, not human. It grew louder and louder, as if it came from all directions. Emma shouted, "We have to get out of here." She tried to run for the door, but as she got closer, the door slammed shut with incredible force, as if an invisible hand was holding it down. No one in the group dared to go near the door again. "This isn't a joke anymore," Sarah gasped, her voice shaking. "We did something wrong." Lucas, though trying to appear calm, showed his fear. We summoned something." In that moment, a blurry figure appeared in the air, as if slowly emerging from the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in a floor-length black dress, her messy hair framing her face. Her eyes glowed red, like two ghostly lamps. It was Morgana. Morgana. Lucas whispered, not believing his eyes. The witch Morgana said nothing, just approached them, slowly, step by step. The air around them grew so cold that their breath turned into white wisps in the air. We have to break the ritual, Sarah screamed, running toward the chalk circle. But as she tried to erase it, her hands froze as if held in place by an invisible force. Morgana stood behind her, her giant shadow looming over the room. Emma trembled, trying to scream, but no sound came out. Jake and Lucas were also completely helpless, standing as if glued to the floor. In a moment of desperation, Lucas recalled the spellbook. There must be a way to stop her. He rushed to the book, flipping through its pages frantically. But before he could find the answer, the fire from Morgana's crimson eyes erupted, filling the house with screams of terror. In a moment of desperation, Lucas recalled the spellbook. There must be a way to stop her. He rushed to the book, flipping through its pages frantically. But before he could find the answer, the fire from Morgana's crimson eyes erupted, filling the house with screams of terror. Every Halloween, the town of Windy Hollow comes alive with the biggest Halloween festival in the area. The highlight of the festival is the haunted Hayride, a horse-drawn carriage ride through the dark, dense woods where actors dressed as ghosts, ghouls, and other scary creatures jump out to scare visitors. Every year, residents and tourists from all over flock to join this exciting and spooky ride. This year, a group of young people including Jason, Emily, Claire, and David decided to go on a hayride like every year. They were prepared for the scares of the actors, but what they didn't know was that this year's ride would be unlike any other. The night of Halloween was windy, cold, and a thick fog began to cover the town. The group eagerly climbed into the large wagon, where bales of hay had been neatly stacked. The wagon was pulled by two large black horses, and the driver was an old man with a stern face and a long black cloak. "Ready to go?" the old man asked, his eyes shining strangely in the moonlight. "Sure," Jason laughed, not noticing the uneasiness in the old man's voice. The group laughed, unconcerned. The carriage began to move, its wheels creaking as it rolled over the winding dirt roads, taking them deeper into the forest. All around, the air became strangely quiet, the only sounds being the howling wind and rustling dry leaves. The road grew darker, the surrounding trees twisting like black hands reaching out from the darkness. Suddenly, a giggle sounded from behind the car. Claire jumped, turned around, but saw no one. It must be one of the actors scaring us, she thought, shrugging. But strangely, No one jumped out of the shadows, no gleeful laughter from the actors like every year. "Something's wrong," Emily whispered, her eyes anxiously looking ahead, where the fog was thickening. "Why isn't anyone scaring us? Don't they do this every year?" Jason tried to reassure her. "They're probably waiting for us to go deeper into the woods. Take it slow, we'll get scared out of our wits." But the creepy feeling did not go away. The deeper they went into the forest, the more eerie the silence became. The light from the lantern hanging on the carriage was no longer enough to illuminate the path ahead, and the fog seemed to swallow everything around them. Suddenly, the carriage stopped. For no apparent reason, the horses stood still, no longer pulling the carriage. The old man driving the carriage said nothing, just stood there silently. "What's going on?" David asked, trying to see through the mist. The old man just stared ahead, then slowly turned his head to look at his friends with a blank gaze. "Here we are," he said calmly. "Where?" Jason asked, his voice starting to crack with worry. Just then, from within the forest, shadows began to appear. At first, they were just vague shadows, but then they became clearer. Ghosts, not actors in makeup, but real ghosts, began to move towards the carriage. Their eyes were empty, their clothes were torn, and their faces were distorted with hatred. Emily shouted, "This is not a joke." But no one answered. The group began to panic, trying to jump out of the carriage, but it seemed like an invisible force was holding them back. The ghosts were getting closer and closer, their faces becoming more monstrous under the dim light. A cold wind blew, carrying the whispers of the dead souls. "We have to get out of here," Claire shouted, grabbing Jason's hand. The old coachman didn't move, just stood there, as if he had been dead for a long time. Ghosts began to surround the carriage, cold hands reaching out to pull them down. A feeling of dread washed over the group. David tried to push himself out of the ghost's embrace, but to no avail. "We can't stay here. We have to get out," he shouted. Finally, Jason jumped out of the car, dragging Emily, Claire, and David with him. The group rushed into the forest, running through bush and rugged terrain, trying to escape the ghosts that were chasing them. Their footsteps echoed in the dark night, and the ghosts' red eyes followed them every step. After a brief escape, the group suddenly burst out of the woods and back into town. The town was still bustling with people, filled with the laughter and cheerful music of Halloween. They looked back, but the woods behind them seemed to have disappeared. There was no sign of the carriage or the ghosts. After a brief escape, the group suddenly burst out of the woods and back into town. The town was still bustling with people, filled with the laughter and cheerful music of Halloween. They looked back, but the woods behind them seemed to have disappeared. There was no sign of the carriage or the ghosts. The group left the festival in a hurry, and from that day on, none of them mentioned the hayride again. However, stories of the haunted hayride continued to spread throughout the town of Windy Hollow, and no one was sure that the ride was simply a harmless scare. Hollow Creek is a small town surrounded by hills and pristine forests. Every fall, the cold air begins to creep into every alley, and the yellow leaves spread across the streets. However, when Halloween night comes, the town becomes completely different. People always tell ghost stories surrounding Hollow Creek, but none of them are as scary and haunting as the ghost of Hollow Creek. Legend has it that hundreds of years ago, there was a young girl named Eliza who lived with her family on a farm outside of town, near Hollow Creek. Eliza was a beautiful, gentle girl, but one Halloween night, she mysteriously disappeared. The townspeople searched everywhere for her, from the woods to abandoned houses, but no one could find any trace of her. After that, it was rumored that she was led into the woods by an evil spirit and never returned. Since then, every Halloween night, the people of Hollow Creek believe that Eliza's ghost will appear at the stream where she disappeared, calling out to anyone who dares to come near. Those who hear Eliza's voice will be swept into the stream and disappear like her, becoming part of the curse forever. On Halloween night, a group of friends, Jack, Lucy, Ben, and Rachel, decide to test the legend. They have heard about Hollow Creek and the rumors of Eliza's ghost since they were young, but none of them have ever dared to go to the creek on Halloween night. All the warnings from the townspeople have been ignored. The group believes it is just a story to scare children, and they decide to find out the truth. That night, the wind blew hard through the woods, carrying a chill in the air like a warning. Jack led the group, flashlight in hand, into the woods toward Hollow Creek. Lucy and Ben tried to act strong, but couldn't hide their anxiety, and Rachel, even the bravest of them, sensed something was wrong. "Are we really going to do this?" Ben asked, his voice low and worried. "It's just a fairy tale," Jack replied, trying to reassure his friends. "There are no ghosts or spirits. We'll go to the stream, sit there for a while, and then come back." As the group approached the stream, the atmosphere grew heavier. Under the dim moonlight, the waters of Hollow Creek sparkled strangely. The water was calm, without a ripple, but everyone felt that there was something unnatural about the stillness. The group sat by the stream, listening in silence. They began to talk about the legend, but gradually the conversation died down as the atmosphere became more eerie. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees suddenly disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, a soft voice rang out from the stream. "Help me!" Rachel jumped. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her eyes looking toward the water in panic. Ben nodded, his eyes wide with surprise. "That's Eliza's voice." Jack stood up, staring at the stream. "It can't be, it's just the wind." But then the voice spoke again, this time clearer. "Help me! Someone help me!" Lucy trembled, clutching Rachel's hand. We should get out of here." Before the group could move, the water began to swirl. From the middle of the stream, a blurry figure slowly emerged. It was a girl with long flowing hair, her face as pale as mist. Her eyes were empty, her hands outstretched as if asking for help. "Eliza," Jack exclaimed, incredulous. Rachel backed away, panicked. "We have to go. This is not a joke." But as the group tried to run away, they found themselves unable to move. An invisible force pulled them closer to the stream, and Eliza's eerie laughter echoed through the air. The ghostly girl continued to move closer, her empty eyes staring straight at them. "Stay with me, forever." Her voice echoed in the night, haunting and dark. Helpless and terrified, the group was slowly drawn into the swirling waters of Hollow Creek, disappearing beneath the surface in utter silence. The next morning, the group was nowhere to be seen. They had become part of the curse, just like Eliza before them. The legend of the ghost of Hollow Creek continued to spread, and no one dared to go near the stream on Halloween night again. 4-0. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to the channel to wait for the next videos.